Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming. I guess if someone can make a note in the chat or the Q&A that you guys can hear me, that would be lovely. Hi. Thanks, Courtney. Perfect. So I'm Tammy, your lower adolescent program director, and welcome to new families. Welcome to old families, and thanks for being here on this evening. It's kind of chilly, so thank you. I've pre-recorded a video for us to watch just in case there's any glitches. That was requested. So after we view that video, it's about 34 minutes. After we view that, we'll do a Q&A, and you can either just pop in verbally or raise your hand on that little blue hand or write a question in the Q&A box. So without further ado, I will pull up that, hopefully, there it is, that video that's pre-recorded. So oh boy, hopefully you guys can see the lower adolescent distance learning. And if not, just drop me a note in the chat. Sometimes it doesn't follow me when I want it to. Thanks for being here. My name is Tammy Lindberg, the lower adolescent program director. And I'm here to talk today about distance learning and sort of what we know. We'll talk about all the different components that you're maybe experiencing right now as a student or with your students throughout of being 6 years for each. And Montessori calls that rhythm the constructive rhythm of life. So you might see that in places as we go through this year. There are two lines that make up this triangle: progression and regression. So this is Montessori pedagogy here. And the line of progression reaches its peak at the middle of the age. And then the regression starts to happen. So our students are 12 to 15-year-olds, right there. And the left side of the triangle is the opening stage of life. In other words, it opens up to a particular set of experiences and consequently to the related acquisition of that time. So like I mentioned, that's right where we find our students. The triangles are equal in size, and they represent the vital role of sensitive period or sensitivities during this time. And the red triangles represent really creative periods, and blue represent more concrete periods. So what she says is that adolescence is the time where it is the creating of the adult species. Physically, you're seeing your student or you're seeing yourself change significantly. Maybe they're getting super tall, going through puberty, eating a ton. Oh my God, we can't keep the fridge stocked, kind of a thing. And psychologically, it's a transition from that child that lives with their family to the adult who lives in society. Oops, pick it up. So this is when the social human or the social person is created but hasn't reached their full development. So in school, we focus a lot on what's going on out in the world. We do a ton of collaborative learning, all of that. This is also the time, the sensitive period, where there should develop the most noble characteristics that would prepare a person to be social. That is to say, a sense of justice and a sense of personal dignity. That's from childhood to adolescence. So we're seeing all of this development and change. Doubts, hesitations, violent emotions sometimes, discouragement, and the unexpected decrease in intellectual capacity. And that shows up most iconically in their executive functioning skills, their ability to track work, their ability to complete work, get it done, or even like, wait, what was I doing? Or I told my student, I asked them to sweep the floor and they didn't do it. What happened? And you find them off engaged in another task. So we see that really significantly right now as their prefrontal cortex develops. So we have these twin problems of protecting the adolescent and helping them for their entrance into society. We want to prepare them for their life ahead, but we don't want to throw them to the wolves yet. And we see that tension playing out a lot as we try to guide them in their home lives or their work lives, and they really do want to feel the independence. So that's the reason we have one of these main parts of our school day is this noble adolescent work. And Montessori, this comes right out of Montessori pedagogy, stresses that all adolescents are noble. She says, we must have the greatest respect for the young personality, realizing that in the soul of the adolescent, great values are hidden. And that in the minds of these boys and girls and all students, it should say, in this time and place, there lies all our hope of future progress and the judgment of ourselves and our time. She writes, the adolescent is a gift, a creature equipped with incredible natural powers and with great destiny looming. They will become a power for good, a change agent in our ailing and confused society. And she wrote this right after World War I. We must not waste even 1 ounce of this wealth. We must hoard it as the riches of our earth were hoarded in the past. What is needed today is an education that will lead the human personality to recognize humanity's grandeur. So, what does that mean? Noble adolescent work. The adolescent is curious, creative, original, authentic, sees the big picture, looking for the future, compassionate, forgiving, high expectations of themselves, values independence and choice, and sees the problem of society creatively, and is not trapped by yes and no thinking, that binary. So how we encourage that right now, here are some supporting documents that you can click on and read at your leisure. Concretely, students are working on this noble adolescent to better themselves, their family, or their community. So there's a lot of pedagogy that we quickly went over because I don't want to keep you forever, but the concrete, we're asking for this every day, and students are reflecting on it every day in their work journal. It could be chores around the home, care for a family member, exploring an interest like sewing or wood carving, becoming a better writer. Maybe your student really wants to have a farm one day. Go research that. Or they're into horses. Go research that and really think about what does it mean to have a horse, and document that and create big work. And they're recording that in their distance learning work journal, which they can go through that with you. And a part of that noble adolescent is the physical expression work that we also ask of students. She writes, the period of life in which physical maturity is attained is a delicate and difficult time because of the rapid development and change in which the organism must go through. The human organism becomes so delicate. So what the goal is to offer many different opportunities to explore ways to stay physically healthy, to allow for individual differences in physical ability and interest, and to provide choice. So concretely, we ask students to perform any physical expression that is meaningful to them for 30 minutes a day and reflect on that in their work journal. If that is football practice, so be it. If that is walking your dog for the physical activity, so be it. What's important is that it's what is meaningful to the student. Parents can help, caregivers can help their student understand what is the right level of work, because sometimes adults have more experience with this and knowing and reading your body. But we're really trying to take the lead from the students here. And we also have mindful mornings every single day from 8:30 to 9 a.m. So our day starts at 8:30 and it's a centering practice before the day. So we bring a different practice every Monday to students. The other day they listened to Cloud Cult, and that band share what it means, what music means to them and how they center it to them. It could be everything from eating a good breakfast. It could be exercising in the morning, listening to music, meditating, drawing. Getting your stuff prepped and ready to go is also a really good meditative thing that students can do. You can't do it wrong. We just want you to come into the day centered and focused. And we'll be doing share outs for this in Monday's advisory for the 9th grade and learning cohorts for the 7 and 8. So that's one thing you can be checking in on with your student. As your program lead, I've really been out there researching the best practices for distance learning. And what we've told you so far is pretty spot on. I'll reinforce those. It's establishing the routines, whether it's posting a daily schedule or going through it with your student until they know it. And once they know it, you're checking in and keeping them going with it. Preparing the space, the learning environment, your desk. The 7th and 8th graders spoke today in community meeting about keeping their desk clean and keeping the hallway cleaned outside their room. The other part, which is tricky and brand new, is this learning Schoology. So as a parent, you want to have some familiarity with it so that you are not coming into the support time with your student also in the dark. So a little bit of familiarity goes a long way, and caregivers can go and access to the help desk hours that we have set up with a consultant, and those hours are found on the calendar that's linked on the website. There's Zoom etiquette that we want students to be following. Ensure your adolescent sleeps. It's very, very important. And you want to monitor that screen time. So if they've just spent a good chunk on Zoom, that day and you know about it, maybe playing video games that night isn't the best for their physical health, their eyes, their headaches, you know, maybe they need a walk before doing that. Or, you know, if there is a break and you happen to know that the student's on a break, encourage them to get up and move away from the screen rather than texting a friend or playing a video game or something, even though it's so tempting. I get it. Communicate with guides. We are here for you, and you are the sort of assessment that we need to help get feedback. So communicate with us, especially if you have any questions. And this final note is take care of you, yourself, the caregiver. Sort of like you can't help others put their mask on the airplane if you don't have your own oxygen mask on. So all those tips that we talk about in the world about self-care, that really applies to you as well. And of course, your students and your family. So how do we help students at home? There are some different ways to go about this. So you know your student best. If they need high amounts of support, you can handwrite a schedule out with the student or for the student on a whiteboard or on a notebook paper, in a journal. So that's a high amount of support. The medium amount is helping your students set alarms for their class, iPads, phones, whatever it is. Low amounts of support, you're creating a schedule that has the Zoom links. And here's that schedule template that's linked. And your student can help you with that, and actually should help you with that. And you know your student is flying solo when they're using the Schoology calendar to get to their classes, submit their work. The other most important skill or tip is to check in with your student. We know that independent reading works best when there's adults checking in on that. If you're checking in on things like independent reading, if you're checking in on their work journal, or what did they learn in class today? What do they remember? That check-in point is super beneficial to the retention of the knowledge that they learned. If they can practice it again at the end of the day, wonderful. And if they can't, pull Schoology back up and check it out and say, oh, well, you know, Adam went over this. What was going on here? That's really helpful. There are tips that I've learned as an educator during independent work at school. And when you're trying to help a student and you don't know the answer, you don't know how to figure out the answer to that algebraic equation, lead them to the correct concept. We don't want you to teach it. So you would find their notes that say where the algebraic concept is. And if it still isn't figured out, we often say in adolescent program, is there a peer you could reach out to? Or they're sitting over there in independent work in real time, and we'll connect them with each other. Here you could say, could you G-chat another group of students? That is what some adolescent students are doing a lot. And they're setting up maybe FaceTime groups to work together, or setting up their own Zoom links to do that, or going into breakout rooms during those independent work sessions. So, and helping them connect with their guide, visiting office hours on Wednesday morning, you know, just making sure that they're asking guides for help. And, you know, we think that by the time they're at the top of our peak, the 7th through 9th grade, we'd think that they'd have it down, but it's still a really big skill for even the 9th graders to acquire. So encouraging those students to reach out is really important, and a hard skill. And I say all the time, we have to be patient, we have to be understanding, and know that the students are working pretty hard in most cases, and the guides are working really hard too. So patient and understanding. If you're wondering about some strategies we typically use in school to help students focus during the synchronous classes, and it's even harder to focus through a screen. So there's a couple tips here. Take notes, doodle notes in an outline format. There's a bunch of seating aids listed here, and we have these wobble seats that we can loan out from the school, and just enabling your space to be propped. You're like, move your computer up so you can stand or whatever. We don't want students to eat a sandwich during class or a bowl of soup, but small snacks or gum can help the student stay focused. And then taking those breaks. When the guide is like, okay, we're breaking, get off the screen as much as you can, or take a 5-minute break too. So, and a recap goes, if your student is struggling, prepare the workspace, create a daily plan, and go through Schoology. And also reach out. If you need help, reach out. You are not alone. We are a moment away. The other part of this conversation is really focusing on standards-based grading. So standards-based grading is a way to assess students that feels really important during this time and place for Great River to switch to this. Though many schools around our city and state and country and world have been using standards-based grading for a long time. So a century of learning and research has given us tectonic shifts in what we think. Student demographics have changed, and we're at a more informed sense of justice and opportunity because of the events of the social justice events of this spring and summer and the pandemic. So we've fundamentally changed how we think about schools and the children we serve, or the adolescents we serve. We know that when student experience is differentiated and culturally responsive, and the supports and challenges are there, only the slimmest subset of children are incapable of meeting our academic standards. And each student then can choose their own path from all these different opportunities. So it's much more student-centered when we have standards-based grades. It's collaborative, it's differentiated, so much more than when I went to high school or middle school. And technology has really redefined how students access the information. So they also demonstrate their learning so much differently. And we've got a diversity of student ethnicities, religions, language, gender identities, families, and histories. So a continued use of that traditional grading practice contradicts and undermines effective and equitable teaching and learning, particularly for students historically underserved. And it also stifles risk-taking by students and the trust built between teachers and students. So traditional grades support the commodity of grades, the commodification of grades, hides information, invites bias, and provides misleading information. It also demotivates and disempowers the students. So we'll talk about the purpose for students, the purpose for guides, and the purpose for caregivers more concretely as we go through this. So the standards-based grading, like I mentioned, gives a clear picture of the whole child, communicates what the student has learned and demonstrated and what they haven't, and where their growth areas are. And it provides all of us with the information about next steps and how caregivers can support the student at home. So think about the last assignment that your student received feedback on. Maybe it was last year, maybe it was super recently. Do you know by the traditional grading scale, where their strengths were, what academic areas they needed to work on, the next steps to do better, or how your child was performing in the classroom. Oftentimes, traditional grades are wrapped up with their executive functioning skills. Did they turn it in on time? Were they able to read the directions? So on and so forth. So that doesn't really make sense at this point. You may be familiar with the words summative and formative assessment. And so we are categorizing this year all assignments and assessment as formative and summative. Formatives are the things that form your knowledge, that build up your content area knowledge about a subject. And then the summative is where the student demonstrates it. So the formative assignments hold no weight in the final grade, but oftentimes, most of the time, they lead up to a whole understanding and demonstration of knowledge in that summative work. And you might say, well, how will my student be held accountable? We'll get there, I promise. And I'm going over some of this with brevity because I want to not talk ad nauseum. And this is the topic of next month chat. So we'll go through it more then. You will see that all of our assignments are on a grading scale, and sometimes they're out of 7 points. Sometimes it's like a little formative assessment that we just want to make students are doing to come prepared to class for. And that we wouldn't grade on a 7-point scale. We would grade on a like complete, incomplete, missing, or you did it. That sounds great. So we've got these 7 points here. If your student or you as the student are getting a 1 or a 2, that's an area of concern. That's not on track. So making it really clear right now that if you're in 1s or 2s, you should be getting emails from your guide. Sometimes those get lost in the ethernets or something. But as a support person, that's an area of concern. That's a reach out to people. 3 is a limited proficiency. A little bit more of an area of concern, but not necessarily needing an intervention. 4 is nearing proficiency. 5 is proficient. 6 is mastery, and 7 is exceeding mastery. And you'll notice there's no percentage there. There's no percentages. And we are going away from those percentages because we need to give students clear, efficient, straightforward, and understandable feedback, understandable measurements that they can develop. There's usually 3 formative assessments in a learning cycle per learning objective. And so the student gets to get better each time. And we don't want to have any part of the grade book be held on that formative work because the student is just figuring it out. The student is just understanding and they're growing in their knowledge. So they shouldn't be penalized at the end of the grading cycle for that very beginning knowledge that was just forming. This standards-based grading allows us to give feedback on those learning objectives that come right from the standards, the Minnesota State standards. You know, what does it mean by this? And the grading system is more equitable. And Montessori focuses on this intrinsic motivation that the standards-based grading fosters. So we're seeing now a more direct lineage from what she wrote so much about in the elementary. And now it's flowing more directly throughout the high school, all the way until 12th grade. So students might be wondering, what does my transcript look like, or the final grade at the end of the cycle? And we will put those grades in there so that colleges and universities and families get another sort of view of what it looks like. You can see that the 1s and 2s are Fs and Ds, correlate to Fs and Ds. 3, it correlates with C. 4s, mostly 4s, correlate to Bs. 5s and 6 is your A minus, A range. And then the 7 is like your really strong A, your A pluses. So we sort of touched on this a moment ago, that in the very beginning, this week 1 F for formative assessment, we see those, we want to see, or we likely see those scores are a little bit lower because they're just learning their knowledge. They're just kind of figuring it out. And as the weeks progress, you see this scale, these numbers increase unto their final summative assignment. That's what the S is there. It's that final assessment. The student is demonstrating their knowledge at a 5. And we're keeping that end score. We're not averaging it. So this formative scale, or this formative score here, brings down what they're showing they knew at the end. So it's providing a little bit of wiggle room for mistakes to happen along the learning cycle. And for that growth mindset of you can do it, you keep going. It's all about the learning process here. So if a student doesn't complete the formative work, we know the formative work does not count to the overall grade, but it is scored and we are giving feedback on it regularly. So we do have some universal interventions here, which means that all students get this intervention. All students keep a work journal, and all students go to Synchronous Indie Work to meet with their guide to talk about the work that's coming up, or to clarify, or to say like, hey, this follow-on work is really interesting to me. Can you help me like develop my idea more fully for a summative assessment? We are grading, our grade books are updated on Mondays, though at this very moment, we are debating whether to say Wednesdays, because we don't necessarily want to put the pressure on students to do work over the weekends, or to have faculty working over the weekends. So we're considering changing this to Wednesdays, this Monday right here. And family contact is being made on Fridays. So if your student is struggling, we're asking guides to reach out on Fridays to say something like, your student did not turn in work this week, did not submit their formative assignments, or is missing their summative, or they didn't engage in the material at the right level. They're getting 1s and 2s. So that's sort of like the second step. Then we have a family meeting for problem solving, and then we can go into more specific targeted interventions if it is necessary. A little look at Schoology for our final slide, rounding out 33 minutes. How does this appear in Schoology? So this DEF, D-E-F, is Defense of the Dark Arts. It's just our, one of our classes that doesn't have any students in, and we, show it to parents for this kind of thing. This F means formative, so it won't be counted. It doesn't really it doesn't go towards the end score, and that's the time where students get to learn and grow and try things out and ask questions. Those summatives are what counts. So you'll see the S and the F. Things should be organized under folders. There are a few classrooms that we're still working on aligning this. So a caveat there. And so I will stop at this point and just bring us back to one of the main pages, and this 4 planes of development. So we are going from adolescence into childhood to adolescence right here. And they're really growing a lot. There's a lot going on in the 12 to 15-year-old's body and brain. And we're trying to be as responsive during this really kind of, dare I say it, unprecedented time. So I look forward to answering and lots of questions and having discussions with you. Thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your day. Okay, well, thank you for sitting through that. Sometimes my my stupid sense of humor comes flying out in these videos. So thanks for bearing with us there. If you have a question, you can put that either in the chat or in the Q&A section, or you can also raise your blue hand and we'll see if we can give that one a go too. One thing I'll put into the chat is our lower adolescent social worker. Their name is Ori, and if you need anything, you can always email them. Another point of contact is your student's advisor. So, and yeah, in the grade, one of the questions is in the grade section of Schoology, sometimes I see the 7-point scale associated with assignments, and some I only see a C. And that is when when the guide is using that complete or incomplete scale. So it's usually like before they get to classwork, and the guide wants the student to know something before they come to class, or it's like an in-class assignment that they want the student to participate in, but don't necessarily need to give feedback on. So the C, the only time you should see a C in Schoology is for complete, and then sometimes it looks like a 1, but it's an I for an incomplete. So if you're a 7-8 student and you'd like to reach out to your guide, you could always reach out to the cohort guide that they're in, and also the advisor, because that can help too. And if you're a 9th grade student and family, you can reach out to that particular guide as well, and also the advisor. And how should I and my child interpret the scores they get on assignments in terms of how to improve or gain more mastery? Especially in the 7th and 8th grade, they have a weekly check-in with their cohort leader. And that's the time that if there's not feedback in the grade book, that guide is giving feedback to the student right then in that one-on-one session once a week. Sometimes it doesn't quite make it to once a week, so it's once every other week. But I think guides are also getting more of a handle on Schoology. And we switched to Schoology so that you guys, family members, would have just one platform to deal with, and try to like decrease the number of platforms, because I know we're still using like formative and things like that. But we really wanted to try and streamline it. And so guides are kind of figuring that out as, they fly the ship, so to speak. So we should see more feedback now, especially since we're nearing the middle of the learning cycle. We should see more substantial feedback there. And you could always reach out to the guide, or the student could reach out to the guide as well. And how do you tell if assignments are being turned in? So if you have the notifications on in Schoology, which I know some families don't want that because it's kind of overwhelming. if you have them on and the assignment sort of due date expires and it's not turned in, Schoology will send you a notification. And if the guide marks it as incomplete, meaning missing, the Schoology will send you an assignment as well. So you can really see if it's turned in or not. And the student actually has to like click submit when they turn it in. So it should be fairly straightforward, though what we know is that Schoology is not exactly the most intuitive process. So that is what I would recommend there. Should students have video on? That is a really tricky situation. So what the experts out there in distance learning tell us, John Hattie is one of them, who many educators just love him. Many educators don't though too. But he just said yesterday in a webinar that I was in, that what we know is that when the screens are off, the student and the guide aren't making as much eye contact. And so then the engagement decreases. Or like when they're in breakout rooms and their video is not on, the engagement decreases a lot if the screens aren't on. So we want so much for those screens to be on. It's also super hard to engage with a black screen with little white letters on it if your picture's not there. But we also know that these Zoom, you're like seeing into our homes, and it's a little intrusive. It's a little weird. And so some families, some students don't feel comfortable with it. And they're at this really particular time in their life where they're so self-conscious and they're developing so fast that it's just a different thing for the lower adolescent. When I observe in upper elementary classes or upper adolescent, there's more screens on, but lower adolescent, it is a different time for them developmentally. They're very self-conscious. They're very aware of their peers. So I know one cohort, Michael's cohort today, had a really nice conversation about how and what it means to not have your camera on and how do you be part of the community. And we'll keep having those conversations. But we'll invite students over and over and over again. We'll never make it mandatory. And I don't know if GRS offers cameras, but I can sure check it out. And maybe when I send this out, hopefully we've gotten the information back by then. So, yeah, sorry, we won't require the camera to be on, but it's just too much, if we were at school, fine, but it's just too intrusive. And there's a lot of faculty members who don't agree with it either. So kind of where we are. There is a tutorial for Schoology that we will send out. I can add that in there too. There's a pretty good one from another school that we like. So same thing. There's also those office hours that are on the calendar on greatriverschool.org, the website. And the guy Troy is super helpful. I go there like every morning and ask him more questions and fine tune things. So those are open to you as well. And we're just talking today in one meeting about having like a parent night where Troy gives it to families about Schoology only, and you can ask questions there too. So reminders about gaming during class. Yeah, it's hard for us to know when students are gaming. Sometimes it's super easy to tell, but that's kind of like a conversation, and the control really lies at home. So having that conversation with students about how much screen time is necessary for your eyes and your head. during the day. And then it's a place of community. And I know this summer, a lot of parents are saying it's how students can meet with each other and like play with each other, which is also important. So it's really a family decision, but definitely no game playing during the school time. We are noticing that some students play video games during their breaks. So like Elizabeth this morning gave the students, the cohort, a break, and some stayed and played video games, but forgot to turn their video off. So like you can tell, and it's kind of not serving the purpose of the break, which is to like give your eyes a break. So yeah, the video does sometimes lag depending on how strong your internet is or how many people are on the internet or, the time of day, basically. So the Chromebook should work. There are some ways to boost your internet that we can troubleshoot and look into there to see if you can get it there. But that is a common problem with Zoom taking up so much bandwidth. Yeah. And there's another question about noble adolescent work and PE expectations. I get why we want to do them, but enforcing an open-ended assignment is difficult when it's up to the student. You're right, it is really difficult. And it's that part of development that it kicks in. All of a sudden they get excited about something and it kicks in. And we offer those different ways to try it out on Mondays. And we talk about, like in breakout rooms, how it's going and what other things kids are trying to do. And we hope once the students get the schedule down and things really calm down, we hope to develop coalitions so that if me and 3 other of my peers all like to go running in the morning, we have a coalition and we meet and talk about our goals, talk about ways to get there, share our successes, and maybe even our new sneakers. That would probably be the highlight of my thing. So it is really open-ended and it is really student-driven and it is really intrinsically motivated. Such is Montessori. So there are a few constraints around it, but we try to really like follow the lead of the student or the child. So what we know is that frequent check-ins from families or from a supportive adult is really helpful. So any of those open-ended things like independent reading where they're supposed to read a half an hour a day, checking in and seeing like, hey, what was your book about today? What did you like about it? Really helps and increases the student's motivation if there's somebody else checking in on it too. But they're also at the developmental period where they want their independence. So you might get a mom too. So it really is the time of their life that we as family members become consultants and not so much the parent that they needed us to be in elementary school. So you can almost watch your student grow up right now. Kind of sad. How do you suggest we encourage them to find the desire to learn and move to that next level? If I think about, so I was a gymnast back in the day, and if I think about athletics and sports, or I think about soccer, now that I am supporting a lot in my house, it's really like encouraging, talking about it, saying like, oh, that was a really, like, I saw you come flying up the field and grab the ball from that other player. And then how do you think that game went? What do you think? What were you proud of? What could you have gone better? But I feel like when we start dictating or even sometimes suggesting, like, here's this cool video I found on Instagram, the adolescent kind of shies away from us. So they're really independent right now, and it's all social. It's all their friends. So maybe finding ways to get friends or peers or teammates involved in that as well. So it's tricky, and it really, like, as a Montessorians, we observe a lot, and I'll just sit there and watch a situation play out, and then sometimes I need to sleep on it, and then an idea comes the next day of like how we can, work together and maybe make our projects move to the next level. So another, if it's academic, finding like the magazine article that might be out there that relates but is more interesting, helping giving them resources and not pushing it, just being like, hey, look what I found, sometimes helps too. So I hope that was a helpful answer. It's still kind of vague, but that's what I've learned after 12 years of working with adolescents. So breakout rooms they're really a long period of silence, and students afraid to speak up. So we're working on this too, and we're having conversations, and I think it's just supporting the community members, and we're going to try bigger breakout groups, because the like 3 or 4 person ones sometimes don't work out well. So just being patient and understanding and listening, and maybe helping with leading questions. But it is sometimes when you're in like a completely desolate breakout room where the students aren't quite comfortable yet, it is really hard to speak up if you're an adolescent. So, and those breakout rooms are when they're given the opportunity and invitations to work in dyads and triads and closer connections. And we are also keeping the learning cohorts stagnant and not changing them right now, so that they can build relationships with each other in the 7th and 8th grade. So that should help a little bit. I think another strategy is to have the students like independent work together. So if the student has a peer that maybe isn't in their cohort, but is in a different cohort, maybe in the afternoons, they can Zoom each other. That's what one student brought up the other day in community meeting. That was yesterday. And they're finding ways to connect there too. But I get it that isolation is super extreme to the point where it is taking a toll on students' mental health sometimes. And so then there's support groups that you can join outside of school, or there's the extracurricular clubs after school too that are meeting virtually, I think. And of course, there's the school as a resource center. If you feel comfortable or you have that ability to come in, the student could come and work with other students that are at school, and getting support that way, if that's helpful too. So, yeah. I think that is all the questions. And I'll give you guys a couple minutes. You can always raise your hand too, and then I think how it works is that I can allow you to talk. So these webinars are a really safe way to have these evening events, but it kind of like makes me feel like I'm in a vacuum and that you guys don't really have autonomy here. So Should there be grades in Schoology at this point? Possibly. There might be one or two that haven't gotten, like the students just turned it in recently and they haven't gotten the ability to turn it around quick enough yet. So there should be grades in there very soon, if not yet. But maybe I'll look into that particular class that your student is in and check it out. So that's helpful to know. Thank you. I'll just underscore that the start of the school year is probably the most stressful thing I've ever done. And we've done a lot of crazy things at Great River. So usually we're tackling problems on top of a mountain when it's snowing or 50 degrees. And this is harder than that. So I think that you guys are being really gracious as families, and students and guides are doing their best, and so are students and families too. So like I said a couple weeks ago, or maybe a week ago, that everybody's doing a great job, and we really appreciate you guys being along for the ride with us. So thanks, Courtney. Yeah. So I will put my email in the chat, and you can email me anything and I'll either know the answer or I'll help you get the answer. So yeah, thanks for being here, you guys. And I hope you have a great day tomorrow and a good weekend. So give your student a hug. They need it. Maybe you have students in the lower adolescent. Some of you do. Give them a hug. And if you've got ideas, some of the information on the slide came from questions from other families. So if you've got questions, a lot of other people do too. So let me know. And bye, you guys. Thank you.